He sat alone in a darkened corner, a glass of whiskey in one hand, his other resting casually on the table. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, the kind that wasn't bought off the rack. But it wasn't the suit that caught her attention. It was him. He exuded control, effortless, deliberate. A man who didn't need to speak to command attention. His gaze was sharp, piercing, as if he could see straight through her, peeling back the layers she had desperately tried to keep intact. Their eyes met. And for the first time since she had walked away from her old life, Annelise felt something other than numbness. The stranger took his time, studying her. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he stood. Her pulse quickened. He crossed the room, every step measured, controlled. The closer he got, the more she realized. This was not a man to be ignored. And then, he was beside her. His voice was low, rich, like a whispered secret against the hum of the bar. "Stranger, you're running from something." Annelise turned, arching a brow. "Annelise. And you're the type who watches too much." His lips curved into the ghost of a smile. "Stranger. Observing isn't a crime." Annelise. "No, but it can be dangerous." A pause. The air between them shifted. It wasn't flirting. It wasn't casual conversation. It was something else, something heavier, something more dangerous, something that neither of them could walk away from. The moment they stepped back into the penthouse, Selena turned to face Mogan, her emotions in turmoil. "Why?" Mogan looked at her, waiting. "Why what?" She took a deep breath, gathering every ounce of courage she had. "Why did you say that?" Mogan's expression softened. "Because it's true." Selena let out a shaky breath. "But in the beginning, you said it was just an arrangement." "I thought it was," he admitted. "But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as just a business deal." Her heart clenched. Mogan stepped forward, lifting a hand to gently cup her face. "Every time you fought back, every time you stood your ground, every time you challenged me, I fell for you, Selena." Her throat tightened. "I don't want a contract anymore." His voice was low, intimate. "I want you." She sucked in a breath, her pulse pounding. Mogan tilted his head, searching her gaze. "Tell me, Selena, can you honestly say you feel nothing for me?" Selena's lips trembled. She couldn't lie anymore. She hesitated. Mogan waited, his patience unwavering. And then, she finally admitted it. "I love you." Mogan's entire body stilled. For a split second, there was only silence. Then, in the next heartbeat, he pulled her into a deep, passionate kiss. It was nothing like the kisses before. It wasn't for the cameras. It wasn't for a contract. It was real. His lips moved against hers, slow but hungry, as if he had been waiting for this moment for far too long. Selena melted into him, her hands gripping his shirt, her heart hammering in her chest. When they finally pulled apart, Mogan rested his forehead against hers, a small smirk on his lips. "Finally." Selena laughed breathlessly, pure happiness filling her chest. "Yeah. Finally." 1 year later. The sound of laughter filled the kitchen. Selena, standing at the counter, was struggling to make pancakes while Mogan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her with amusement. "You're going to burn the whole kitchen down." She stuck her tongue out. "I'm trying to be romantic, okay?" Mogan walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You don't need to cook to be romantic. You just have to be here." Selena blushed. "You're ridiculous." Mogan chuckled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And you're mine." And just like that, their love story, once built on a contract, became something real, something forever. The silence between them stretched, thick and charged, as if the very air in La Nuit Écarlate was holding its breath. Annelise studied him, searching for clues in his unreadable expression. The dim lighting cast sharp shadows along his jawline, emphasizing the quiet strength in the way he stood. Controlled, calculated, dangerous. He wasn't just some man passing through Paris. He was something else entirely. Stranger, you still haven't answered my question. Annelise, raising an eyebrow. And which one was that? Stranger, leaning in slightly. What are you running from? She exhaled sharply, tilting her glass, watching the amber liquid swirl. Annelise, does it matter? Stranger, smirking. It does if you think disappearing will solve it. Something about the way he said it made her pause. Her fingers tightened around her glass. This was a man who understood running, who recognized it because he had done it himself. And yet, he wasn't running now. He was watching, waiting, calculating. Annelise, you seem like someone who doesn't waste time on strangers. Stranger, soft chuckle. Neither do you. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, two fractured souls caught in the pull of something neither of them understood yet. And then, Stranger. Damien Sinclair. Her breath hitched. She knew that name. Everyone in Paris did. The Sinclair family controlled more wealth than most European governments. They didn't just run corporations. They dictated economies, bent political landscapes, shaped the world behind closed doors. And Damien Sinclair was their heir. Annelise, measured tone. I'm supposed to be impressed? Damien, amused. I think you're smart enough to know it's not just a name. Her mind was already racing. Why was he here? Why was he watching her? A man like him never did anything without a reason. Annelise let out a slow breath, swirling her drink as she considered him. Annelise, mocking. Let me guess. You're the tragic prince of a golden empire, forced into a life you never wanted? Damien, chuckling. Something like that. Her smirk faltered slightly when he didn't deny it. So she did what she always did when she was cornered. She laughed in the face of it. Annelise, half joking. If we're both running, why don't we just get married? She expected him to laugh, to roll his eyes. Instead, his expression remained unreadable. Damien, calmly. You don't know what you're suggesting? Annelise, shrugging. I know exactly what I'm suggesting. You need a way out and I need a shield. No strings, no emotions. Just a clean-cut deal. His eyes darkened slightly, but there was something else there. Amusement, curiosity, interest. Damien. And what makes you think I'd agree? Annelise, challenging. Because it's the only way you win. A beat of silence, and then his lips curved into the slowest, most dangerous smile she had ever seen. Damien. If we do this, there will be conditions. Annelise, smirking. Of course. I wouldn't expect anything less. Damien, low voice. No emotions, no expectations. This is a transaction, nothing more. She leaned in, mirroring his energy, their faces now inches apart. Annelise. Good. Because love is the last thing I'm looking for. That was the first lie. His eyes flickered with something unreadable before he extended his hand. Damien. Do we have a deal? She hesitated, just for a second. Then she placed her hand in his. The deal was sealed. Neither of them knew they had just set something in motion that could never be undone. The next morning, the headlines exploded. Parisian Damien Sinclair secretly married? Mysterious woman at Damien Sinclair's side. Who is she? Billionaire rebel or genius move? Annelise woke up to her phone, buzzing non-stop. Messages, calls, notifications lighting up the screen in rapid succession. And then, A knock at her door. She barely had time to process before she opened it. And there he was. Damien, looking infuriatingly calm for a man who had just blown up both of their lives. Damien. Pack your things. You're coming with me. Annelise, leaning against the doorframe, unimpressed. Where, exactly? Damien. If we're going to be married, you need to look the part. Annelise, crossing her arms. And what does that mean? He stepped closer, his voice a quiet command. Damien. It means, Annelise? Damien. From this moment on, you are no longer just a woman running from her past. You are my wife. And wives of billionaires? They don't just disappear. They become the most watched women in the world. The first thing Annelise noticed was the silence. Not the comforting kind. The kind that suffocated, pressing against her ears like a warning. She blinked against the soft morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. The sheets beneath her were impossibly soft, a stark contrast to the dull ache in her body from the events of the night before. She was no longer in her apartment. Her eyes darted around the room, large, elegant, yet strangely cold. White marble floors, dark oak furniture, a chandelier dripping with crystals, casting fractured light across the vast space. It was a palace, but something about it felt wrong. And then the realization struck her. This wasn't just a luxury estate, it was Damien Sinclair's world. Annelise sat up slowly, the silky sheets pooling around her. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. Before she could respond, the heavy wooden doors swung open effortlessly. And there he was. Damien Sinclair. Perfectly dressed in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal the edge of his watch, a small detail that somehow made him seem even more dangerous. His presence filled the room instantly, as if he owned not just the space, but everything within it. Damien, calmly. You're awake. Annelise crossed her arms. Annelise. And apparently I live here now? Damien, raising an eyebrow. It's safer this way. Annelise, dryly. For whom? His lips twitched. Not quite a smirk, not quite anything at all. Damien. You'll find out soon enough. Her stomach twisted. She had agreed to a game, but now it was clear. She didn't even know the rules. Annelise spent the day exploring the estate. It was opulent, but not in a way that felt like home. There were rooms filled with rare art, libraries lined with books so old she was afraid to touch them, long corridors where footsteps echoed, as if ghosts still roamed them. But there was one thing missing. There were no family photos, no traces of warmth, as if Damien Sinclair existed but had never really lived. Later that evening, she returned to her room, mind buzzing with questions she wasn't ready to ask. And that's when she saw it. A letter, left on her bedside table. No stamp, no return address, just a single line written in elegant, slanted handwriting. You've made a mistake. He is not who you think he is. Her pulse pounded. Someone had been inside the room. Someone knew about her. Someone wanted her to doubt Damien. She swallowed hard, fingers trembling slightly as she reread the words. And then, the door creaked open. Annelise spun around, her breath catching in her throat. Damien stood in the doorway, watching her, his expression unreadable, his presence too still, too knowing. Had he seen the letter? Did he already know? Damien, calm but with an edge. Something wrong? She hesitated. She could tell him. She could hold up the letter and demand answers, but something in her gut told her that would be a mistake. So she forced a smile. Annelise. Nothing at all. And just like that, the first lie between them was told. The next few days passed in a blur. Annelise was trapped in a world she didn't understand, a world where Damien disappeared for long hours, speaking in hushed tones on the phone, returning with a tension in his jaw that hadn't been there before. And every night, she found another letter. You don't know what he's capable of. Leave before it's too late. He is not your savior. He is your destruction. With each note, her unease grew. Was someone trying to warn her? Or was this another game, another layer of deception in a marriage built on nothing but lies? She needed answers, and there was only one way to get them. That night, as the clock struck midnight, Annelise slipped out of bed and followed the only trail she had. Damien Sinclair's secrets. The sound of heels clicking against polished marble echoed through the estate. Annelise turned toward the grand entrance, heart already pounding with a sense of unease, before she even saw who had arrived. And then, there she was. Isabelle Vautrin, the woman Damien was supposed to marry, the woman he was destined to marry. She stood at the threshold of the Sinclair estate, uninvited, unwelcome, yet completely unfazed. Everything about her was pristine, a carefully calculated appearance. The ivory coat draped over her shoulders, the silk dress hugging her figure just right, the perfectly lined red lips that curved into something not quite a smile. Isabelle, mocking. What? No warm welcome for the almost Mrs. Sinclair? Annelise felt a sharp sting at those words, but kept her expression neutral. Annelise, coolly. You're not almost anything, Isabelle. The wedding never happened. Isabelle, soft chuckle. Oh, darling, you have no idea how wrong you are. A sharp chill ran down Annelise's spine, because Isabelle wasn't here to beg or plead. She was here to destroy. Isabelle walked past her without waiting for an invitation, her heels clicking against the floors like a countdown to something inevitable. She stopped just inches away, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. Isabelle, whispering, Tell me, Annelise, do you really think you know the man you married? Annelise clenched her jaw. Annelise, I know enough. Isabelle, smirking. Do you? She reached into her purse and pulled out a single photograph, a grainy black and white image. A much younger Damien Sinclair, standing in front of a burned-down building, his face expressionless, his eyes colder than she had ever seen them. Isabelle. This was the first time Damien Sinclair got away with something. But I assure you it wasn't the last. Annelise's pulse quickened. Annelise, tightening her grip on the photo. What are you trying to say? Isabelle, leaning in, whispering. That you're married to a monster, and I intend to prove it. Annelise didn't want to believe her. She didn't want to believe the woman who had every reason to hate her, every reason to want to see this marriage collapse. But something about the way Isabelle spoke. It didn't feel like a lie. The photo trembled slightly in her fingers. Annelise, why are you telling me this? Isabelle, softly, dangerous. Because I wasn't stupid enough to marry him. But you were. She turned to leave, but not before leaving her final warning. Isabelle, you think you escaped your past, Annelise. You've just stepped into something far worse. And with that, she was gone. Annelise stood frozen, the photograph burning in her grip. She could hear Damien's voice in her head. You don't know what you're suggesting. Was this what he meant? Was this the truth she was never supposed to uncover? That night, when Damien returned, she was waiting. She sat in his dimly lit study, the photograph placed neatly on his desk. He didn't react at first, just stared at it. Then, slowly, he lifted his gaze to hers. Damien, calmly. Where did you get this? Annelise, measured. Isabelle, she says there's more. A flicker of something crossed his face. Something dark, something dangerous. Damien, low voice. And you believe her? Annelise exhaled, shaking her head. Annelise, I don't know what to believe. A muscle ticked in his jaw. Then, in one swift movement, he picked up the photograph and burned it. Annelise, whispering, horrified. Damien. Damien, quiet but firm. Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to, Annelise. She stared at the flames, the edges of the photograph curling into ash. And for the first time since this all began, she wondered if she had made a mistake. A mistake she might not survive. Annelise had thought she understood the game. She had played along, wearing the mask of the perfect, untouchable wife. But as she sat alone in Damien's study, staring at the remnants of the burned photograph, she realized something chilling. She had never been the player. She had always been the pawn. The air felt heavier inside the mansion. Every gilded surface, every crystal chandelier, every inch of its grandeur. It was all just a facade, hiding something much darker underneath. She could feel it now. The walls weren't just silent. They were watching. And Damien, he was hiding something. She just didn't know how dangerous that something really was. It was instinct, a gut feeling she couldn't ignore. She waited until she was sure Damien was gone, then slipped into his office. The room smelled of leather and faint cigar smoke. A glass of whiskey sat untouched on the desk. She had never gone through his things before. But tonight, she did. The first few drawers held nothing but documents, business files, boring, harmless. Then, her fingers brushed against something different. A folder, thicker than the rest, heavier. She flipped it open. And the first thing she saw, her name. The room spun. It wasn't just her name. It was a file on her life, her past addresses, her habits, her friends. Someone had been tracking her long before she ever met Damien. Her pulse roared in her ears. And then, she saw the second name, her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just about her. Someone wanted him dead, and by marrying him, she had stepped directly into the line of fire. A voice broke through the silence. Damien, calm but with an edge. You should have left that alone. Annelise froze. She turned slowly, finding him standing in the doorway. Dark, unreadable, dangerous. Annelise, shaking, holding up the file. What the hell is this, Damien? He didn't answer. He just stepped closer, his presence suffocating. Damien, quietly. Put it down, Annelise. But she didn't. She couldn't. Annelise, you married me for protection, didn't you? A flicker of something in his gaze. Annelise, voice rising. You didn't just need a way out of an arranged marriage. You needed me to keep you alive. Silence. Then, the confirmation she never wanted. Damien, exhaling, running a hand through his hair. Yes. The word was so simple. So final. Annelise staggered back. Annelise, hoarse whisper. You used me. Damien's jaw clenched. Damien, low, controlled. You think I had a choice? And just like that, the world she thought she knew shattered. Her mind reeled. She had believed she had control, that this marriage had been mutual manipulation, but now, she was just another name on a list. She sucked in a sharp breath, forcing herself to stay steady. Annelise, measured, biting. And now what, Damien? Am I just another loose end you'll have to tie up? His expression darkened. Damien, softly. You still don't get it, do you? She held her ground. Damien. They won't just kill me, Annelise. They'll kill you too. The truth slammed into her like a freight train. She had never been a random choice. By tying herself to him, she had painted a target on her own back. Damien, low, serious. It's too late to walk away now. Her stomach twisted. Annelise, whispering, furious. You never planned to let me go, did you? A slow, knowing smirk touched his lips. "Damien, would you have let me go?" Her pulse pounded, because she didn't know the answer anymore. She had made a deal with the devil. And now, she wasn't sure if she wanted to escape, or if she wanted to burn with him. The night was heavy with silence. Outside, the moon cast a silver glow over the vast Sinclair estate, its light spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Damien's study. But Annelise barely noticed. Her world had shrunk to this moment, to this choice. Run. Walk away now, reclaim the life she once had, forget everything that had happened in the past few weeks. Or stay. Stand by the man who had deceived her, manipulated her, and yet, somehow, still made her feel more alive than she ever had before. Damien, low, watching her. "I won't stop you if you want to leave." That was the second lie he had told her tonight. Because even as he spoke, his grip tightened around the edge of the desk, his knuckles turning white. Because even as he stood there, impassive and unreadable, his pulse was hammering just as hard as hers. Annelise, softly, unsure. "If I leave, will they still come for me?" A muscle ticked in his jaw. Damien. "Yes." Annelise, exhaling sharply. "And if I stay?" A beat of silence. Then he stepped closer, his voice a quiet promise. Damien, whispering, "Then I protect you." She looked up at him, searching for one last sign of deception. But there was none. And that terrified her more than anything. Because for the first time since this all began, she realized Damien Sinclair wasn't just protecting himself. He was protecting her, too. Annelise, soft but unwavering. "If you had told me the truth from the beginning, I probably would have run." A faint smirk flickered across his lips. "Damien, I know." She took a slow breath, steadying herself. Annelise, whispering, "But now? I can't leave you, Damien." His smirk faded. Something unreadable flickered in his expression. Something real. For the first time, she saw the man beneath the mask. The one who wasn't just playing a game, but had been fighting for his life since the day he was born. Damien, low, almost like a confession. "You should." Annelise, stepping closer, whispering back, "I won't." The air between them shifted, a tension that was no longer about danger or fear, or even power. It was something else, something neither of them had planned for. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the trees. Inside, Damien exhaled sharply, as if accepting something inevitable. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his lighter, the same one he had used to burn the photograph. Damien, quietly. "If you stay, Annelise, there's no turning back." She held his gaze. Annelise, soft, determined. "I know." Damien, studying her, voice unreadable. "And you still choose me?" She swallowed, pulse racing. Then she reached forward, closing her fingers over his hand. Annelise, "I choose us, and for the first time since this all began, Damien Sinclair let himself believe in something other than survival." He turned her palm over, pressing the lighter into it. Damien, low, a whisper of a smile. "Then let's burn the past together." She flicked the lighter open. The flame danced between them, small, fleeting, yet undeniable. A single symbol of the life she had left behind. And the life she had just chosen. Want even more? If you love stories filled with romance, suspense, and shocking twists, let us know in the comments what kind of stories you want next. Your feedback helps us bring you the most thrilling, binge-worthy content. Don't miss the next chapter. Hit like, share, and subscribe so you never miss an update. The next part is more intense than ever,